The glass didn't shatter right away. That was the part people got wrong when they imagined it. They thought fear arrived loud, dramatic, like a warning shot. But what those who knew the story remembered most was the pause, the hesitation, the way the night seemed to inhale and forget how to breathe. Ethan Cross was lying awake, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling that looked like a river on a map, when the sound came. Not a crash, not a scream, just a soft, deliberate click of a door being tested. Once, twice, then silence. Hollow Creek was always quiet at night, not peaceful. Quiet in a way that made every sound feel intentional. The refrigerator humming down the hall, the wind brushing the siding, his sister's breathing from the next room, uneven because she never slept well. He thought, someone's outside. He thought, don't move yet. That hesitation lasted less than a second. It cost more than anyone could explain. His name was Ethan Cross, and for most of his life, he believed fear was something a person outgrew until the night it taught him otherwise. The door opened without resistance. No kick, no force, just a slow push, like whoever was on the other side knew exactly how much pressure to apply. The hinges barely complained. The house didn't protest. It let him in. Ethan stood up too late. His feet touched the floor, and the cold ran straight through him, sharp and electric. His heart was already pounding, but his body felt heavy, like it had missed a signal his brain had sent too early. Then his sister screamed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't long. It broke halfway through, like the sound hit something on its way out and shattered. Those who knew Ethan said he still heard that break sometimes, late at night, when everything else was quiet. He ran. That was what he told people, that he ran. But the truth was, he froze first, just long enough to understand what was happening, long enough to picture every bad outcome at once, long enough for fear to do what it does best, multiply. By the time he reached the hallway, the sound of movement was already retreating. Footsteps, fast, calculated, gone before he ever saw a face. The police arrived after. Of course they did. Blue lights painting the walls. Radios murmuring words that felt too small for what had just happened. They asked questions. They checked locks. They wrote things down. They said the family was lucky. That word followed Ethan for years. Lucky that nothing was taken. Lucky that the intruder didn't stay. Lucky that his sister survived. What they didn't say, what no one said out loud, was that luck didn't stop the stranger from touching her. Luck didn't stop the sound she made. Luck didn't erase the fact that Ethan was in the house when it happened and still arrived too late. That was the wound, not the break-in, not the stranger, but the knowledge that he sensed something was wrong and hesitated. His sister never slept the same after that. Neither did he. She started locking her door at night, then barricading it, then sleeping with the light on. Ethan started listening. For footsteps, for breathing that wasn't theirs, for the sound of someone else remembering the layout of their home better than they did. Weeks passed, then months. The house returned to normal in the way houses always do. Furniture stayed where it was. Walls didn't remember, but Ethan did. Every night felt like a test he couldn't afford to fail again. He learned the language of small sounds, the difference between the wind and a footstep, the difference between pipes settling and a floorboard giving weight, the way silence changes when it's waiting for something. Fear didn't leave him. It reorganized him. At first, he thought that was strength. He told himself what happened wasn't trauma, it was training, that some people are meant to see danger early. That hesitation was the only real sin. If he stayed alert, if he stayed ready, nothing like that could ever happen again. That belief saved him, and then it ruined him. Years later, Hollow Creek felt like a place that needed someone like Ethan Cross. It was the kind of town people trusted because nothing ever happened there. No headlines, no sirens after midnight, just routines stacked neatly on top of each other. Same streets, same faces, same assumptions. He moved back after college, not because he missed it, but because he understood it. Patterns were easier to read there. He noticed which porch lights stayed on too late, which alleys echoed longer than they should, which houses breathed differently When no one was home, he volunteered, joined community watch, learned who walked where and when. People appreciated it. They said it made them feel safer. That word again, safe. Those who followed the story understood. This was worth remembering. Stories like this don't keep themselves alive. If someone found themselves leaning in, wondering where this went, taking a moment to stay connected mattered. However that looked, it helped more than most thought. Anyway, back then, vigilance felt clean to Ethan, controlled, like a skill instead of scar, until he noticed him. Caleb Crow didn't stand out at first. That was important. If he had, Ethan might have dismissed him, might have questioned himself sooner. But Caleb blended in the way people who don't need attention always do. Same routes, same pace, same posture. He lived alone, a few blocks from where the streets bent just enough to hide their ends. Worked out hours, spoke when spoken to, never rushed, never lingered. Stillness can be unsettling when someone has learned to measure the world by movement. People mentioned Caleb casually, not accusations, just observations. Quiet guy, keeps to himself, always walking at night. Nothing criminal, nothing solid. But Ethan's body reacted before his thoughts did. A tightening in the chest, a low hum behind the ribs. That familiar sense that something wasn't finished yet. He watched Caleb without meaning to. At first, it was coincidence. Crossing paths, noting time, the way Caleb paused before crossing streets, the way his shadow fell long, even when others shrank. Ethan told himself he was being thorough. Then he started writing things down. Not because Caleb did anything wrong, but because his mind needed order. Dots, times, small observations. Caleb's door opening at the same hour. His footsteps matching the rhythm of the streetlights. Ethan didn't call it suspicion. He called it responsibility. Celine noticed the change before he did. She always did. She'd ask why he was quiet, why he paused before answering questions, why he stared at windows a moment longer than necessary. He told her he was making sure things were safe. She believed him. That made it easier. The nights grew heavier after that. Not darker, just denser, like the air carried weight no one could see. Ethan started waking up at the same time every night, heart racing, convinced he'd miss something. Sometimes he stood at the window until dawn, watching streets that never moved. Sometimes he replayed the past instead. The door opening, the pause, the second he wasted deciding instead of acting. He promised himself he would never hesitate again. That promise didn't feel dangerous. It felt righteous, and that was how it always began. Hollow Creek slept peacefully while Ethan stayed awake, listening for patterns that hadn't revealed themselves yet. He told himself it was preparation, that being ready mattered more than being calm. He didn't know then that fear doesn't fade when it's fed. It sharpens, and it waits. Fear doesn't stay where it's left. That was the first thing Ethan learned when he started speaking out loud. It was small at first, casual comments. Observations slipped into conversations like loose change. He never accused anyone, never said Caleb's name. He didn't have to. All he did was describe patterns. Anyone else notice how late people have been walking lately? Strange hours for deliveries, right? Feels like the town's been off. People listen differently when the tone is calm. They leaned in, asked questions, filled the silence for him. By then, Ethan wasn't just another resident. He had a position. Nothing dramatic, no badge, no gun, but enough authority to be heard. He coordinated neighborhood safety briefings, organized watch rotations. He spoke at town meetings with notes neatly folded in his pocket. Preparation, he called it. And preparation sounds reasonable until it starts replacing sleep. He framed everything as prevention. No panic, no threats, just awareness. But awareness has teeth when given a mouth. Lights started staying on longer at night. Stores began closing earlier just in case. Parents walked their kids to school instead of letting them ride bikes. Teenagers lingered in groups instead of scattering like they used to. Hollow Creek didn't know what was afraid of, only that it should be afraid of something. Celine tried to slow him down. She always used his name when she was worried. Full name, soft voice, like she was grounding him back into himself. "Ethan, you're carrying this alone." He told her he wasn't alone anymore, that the town was finally paying attention. She said attention wasn't the same as truth. He said truth doesn't always announce itself. That was the first real crack between them. Not shouting, not anger, just a difference in where they placed their faith. She believed in evidence. He believed in instincts sharpened by survival. And instincts don't like competition. Ethan saw Caleb at the farmer's market one afternoon. Caleb was talking to Celine, not cornering her, not hovering, just standing there, relaxed, holding a paper bag of apples like he didn't know what to do with his hands. She was smiling. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Ethan stood across the street longer than necessary, telling himself he was observing, not reacting. That jealousy was a lazy explanation for sharper perceptions. Still, his chest tightened the same way it did years ago, standing in that hallway, knowing something was wrong but not knowing why. Caleb laughed at something she said. Not loud, just enough. That laugh stayed with Ethan. After that, he noticed more. How Caleb offered to help people carry groceries. How he fixed a loose step at the community hall without being asked. How his presence made others comfortable. Predators don't usually do that, Ethan told himself. But neither do infiltrators. He started looking for leverage, not evidence. Evidence would have required patience he didn't trust himself to maintain. He needed something ambiguous. Something that could justify his unease without proving it wrong. He found it in the old rail shed. The place had been abandoned for years. Rusted locks, broken windows, a blind spot everyone forgot about because no one used it anymore. Ethan discovered signs of recent activity. Fresh footprints, disturbed dust, a tarp folded too neatly to be accidental. It could have been anyone. That was the beauty of it. He didn't say it was Caleb. He just said someone was using it, that it was close to residential streets, that it wasn't on any official route. Concern spread faster than confirmation ever could. Someone asked if they should alert authorities. Ethan said not yet, not because he wanted to hide anything, but because involving them meant losing control of the narrative, and control felt like safety. He arranged a nighttime patrol, volunteers only, flashlights, radios, rules, everything orderly, everything calm. He made sure Caleb knew about it. Not directly, never directly, just enough visibility that Caleb couldn't miss it. Enough eyes on him to see how he reacted. Caleb reacted like someone who had nothing to hide. That unsettled Ethan more than guilt would have. Celine confronted him after one of the meetings. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. "You're scaring people," she said. He told her fear keeps people alive. She asked him if it was keeping him alive or just busy. He didn't answer. That night, Ethan dreamed of doors opening quietly, of hesitation returning. He woke up convinced the dream was a warning. The next morning, a rumor spread. No one could say where it started, just that someone had been watching houses at night, that a figure had been seen near the creek. People filled in the blanks themselves. Caleb stopped walking after dark. That should have eased Ethan's mind. Instead, it felt like progress. Ethan didn't realize how far things had gone until a shop owner asked him if he should install bars on his windows, or when a mother asked if she should keep her son home from school. He told them to stay alert. He never told them to be afraid. But the difference between the two is thinner than people think. Celine pulled away slowly. Conversations shortened. Touches lingered less. When she looked at Ethan, there was something new there, not suspicion, recognition, that scared him more than anything Caleb ever did. One evening, she told him she was volunteering at the community center with Caleb. Ethan nodded like it didn't matter. Then he spent the entire night awake, rewriting scenarios where he was right. He convinced himself proximity was opportunity. That trust was camouflage. That his hesitation all those years ago had taught him one lesson above all else. If he waited for certainty, he'd already be too late. So he stopped waiting. He started shaping. Nothing illegal, nothing overt, just nudges. Conversations framed a certain way. Timelines emphasized, doubts amplified. He never lied. He just arranged facts so they leaned where he needed them to. The town didn't turn against Caleb. It leaned away from him. And leaning is enough to make someone fall. Ethan told himself he was protecting Celine, protecting Hollow Creek, protecting the version of himself that never wanted to freeze again. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see yet, was that fear had already chosen its host. And it wasn't Caleb. There was a moment when vigilance stopped feeling like protection and started feeling like hunger. Ethan didn't recognize it at first. It arrived quietly, disguised as urgency, as necessity, as the feeling that if he didn't act soon, something irreversible would slip past him. Hollow Creek was no longer calm, not chaotic either, just tense, like a hell breath that never released. People didn't laugh as loudly. They didn't linger as long. Porch lights snapped on earlier in the evening, and windows shut tighter once the sun dipped below the trees. The town had learned a new rhythm, and Ethan was the one keeping time. They came to him now. Questions, worries, suspicions dressed up as hypotheticals. Do you think someone's been checking cars at night? Is it normal for someone to walk the creek trail that late? You don't think we're overreacting, do you? Ethan never answered directly. He didn't need to. Silence did more work than certainty ever could. Caleb withdrew further. His routine shrank. The porch sitting stopped. The casual waves disappeared. He moved through town like someone trying not to leave footprints. That should have ended it. Instead, it felt like confirmation. Celine barely spoke to Ethan now. When she did, it was careful, measured, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing and setting something off. They existed in the same space, but not together. Two parallel lives brushing past each other without contact. One night, Ethan heard her crying quietly in the bathroom. He stood outside the door for a long time, hand hovering near the handle, rehearsing apologies he didn't believe in. In the end, he walked away, because part of him was angry. Angry that she didn't see what he saw. Angry that she still volunteered with Caleb. Angry that she looked at Caleb like he was harmless, and at Ethan like he was something volatile. Fear doesn't like mirrors. It prefers targets. The fracture came the night the shed burned. Not dramatically. Not in a blaze that lit up the sky. Just a contained fire. Enough to draw attention. Not enough to destroy everything. The old rail shed collapsed inward, coughing smoke and sparks like it was exhaling its last secret. No one was hurt, but the timing was perfect. Too perfect. Ethan was among the first on scene, not officially, just because he happened to be nearby. He stood with the others, arms crossed, watching firefighters stomp out the embers. People whispered, speculated, looked at him, waiting. Someone asked if this was what he'd been warning about. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. Caleb wasn't there. That absence spoke louder than presence ever could. The next morning, the town buzzed. Not with panic, with certainty. The shed became a symbol. Proof that something had been brewing beneath the surface. That vigilance had been justified. Ethan told himself he didn't start the fire. And that was true, but he had mapped the narrative that swallowed a whole. Celine confronted him that afternoon. Not gently, not quietly. This has gone too far, she said. People are scared, Ethan. Not careful. Scared. He told her fear was temporary. She asked him how long he planned to feed it. He said until the threat was gone. Her voice broke when she asked, "And what if there's no threat?" That question landed wrong. It felt like betrayal, like she was siding with uncertainty over safety, with Caleb over him. Ethan said things he shouldn't have said, things that sounded like certainty but tasted like desperation. She stared at him like she was seeing someone else entirely. That night, she packed a bag. Not everything, just enough. She said she needed space. Ethan watched her leave without stopping her, because some part of him believed she'd be safer away from whatever was coming next. That belief carried him through the next mistake. Ethan broke into Caleb's house. Not violently, not destructively. He knew when Caleb left for work. He knew which window stuck. He'd noticed it weeks ago, filed away like everything else. He told himself he was looking for clarity, for something real. Caleb's house was painfully ordinary. Clean, Spare, personal and away homes are when someone actually lives in them instead of guarding them. Books stacked neatly. A calendar on the wall with mundane notes, groceries, repairs, volunteer shifts. Celine's name appeared once. A pencil reminder, community center, Celine. Ethan's chest tightened. He searched anyway. Drawers, closets, the garage. Nothing. No weapons. No hidden compartments. No evidence of anything darker than a man living alone. He stood in Caleb's living room, heart racing, surrounded by proof of nothing. That was when he realized the truth had become dangerous. Because if there was nothing, then everything he'd built collapsed. He panicked, not outwardly, internally. A quiet implosion. He planted something, not incriminating, just suggestive. An old utility knife. Rusted, ordinary. Something that could belong to anyone, but would look wrong in the right light. He hated himself as he did it. He justified it immediately after. Temporary, he told himself. Just enough to keep people cautious. Just until things settle. But fear doesn't settle. It escalates. The knife was found 2 days later, by someone else. Someone Ethan hadn't instructed. That coincidence felt like fate validating his choice. Caleb was questioned. Not arrested. Not charged. But questioned. That was enough. The town didn't explode. It recoiled. Trust snapped quietly, like a bone breaking under skin. People stopped pretending. Glances sharpened. Conversations shifted mid-sentence when Caleb passed. Caleb looked smaller after that. Not guilty. Cornered. Celine came back once to collect the rest of her things. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just said, "This isn't protection anymore. It's control." Ethan wanted to tell her he was still the same man. He wasn't. That night, alone in the house, the silence turned on him. No patrols. No meetings. No one calling for reassurance. Just his thoughts. And they were loud. He started seeing patterns that contradicted each other. Timelines that no longer aligned. Motives that required too many assumptions. His certainty began to fracture under its own weight. For the first time, the question surfaced clearly. What if he was wrong? Not about Caleb. About himself. That question didn't bring relief. It brought dread. Because if he was wrong, then the real danger wasn't walking freely. It was already in control. And it had his name. The truth arrived without ceremony. No grand reveal. No courtroom vindication. Just a phone call from the county sheriff. Calm, bureaucratic, final. Caleb Crow had been cleared. Not mostly innocent. Not insufficient evidence. Cleared. The utility knife had been traced. Purchased from a hardware store 2 towns over. Receipts matched. Security footage confirmed. Someone else's transaction. Someone else's fingerprints. Not his. The fire at the shed? Faulty wiring. The inspector's report sat on Ethan's kitchen table now, for pages of technical language that all said the same thing. Accident. No arson. No conspiracy. Just age and neglect doing what they always do. Ethan stared at the pages until the words blurred. His hands didn't shake. That was worse. Somehow, they should have shaken. The town didn't erupt. There was no outcry. No apologies drafted in careful language. People just adjusted. Porch lights stayed on a little less urgently. Conversations returned to weather and gossip. Routines resumed their old shapes, like water filling space after a stone is removed. Caleb started walking again, slowly at first, cautiously, like someone testing ice he no longer trusted. But he walked, and people waved. Not everyone, not enthusiastically, but enough. The meeting happened on a Tuesday. Town hall, fluorescent lights humming overhead, folding chairs arranged in neat rows that felt like a jury box. Ethan wasn't supposed to know about it, but someone he never learned who told him anyway. Maybe out of kindness, maybe out of cruelty. The council sat behind a folding table, hands clasped, expressions carefully neutral. They thank him for his service. Use words like appreciated and dedicated and understandable circumstances. Then they asked him to step back, Temporarily, they said, just until things settled. No blame, no accusations, just a quiet removal. They dismantled everything he'd built in less than 20 minutes. The patrol schedules reassigned, the safety briefings postponed indefinitely, the community watch rotations under review. Ethan sat there nodding, agreeing, saying he understood. He didn't argue. What was there to argue against? They hadn't called him dangerous. They didn't have to. He walked out of that hall into a parking lot that felt too bright, too open. His car sat alone at the far end, like even it had learned to keep distance. He drove home slowly, not because he was careful, because he didn't know where else to go. Celine didn't call. Ethan waited for days, phone always within reach, volume turned up so he wouldn't miss it. Silence, not the angry kind, not the temporary kind, the permanent kind, the kind that says everything that needed say has been said, and he wasn't listening. He drove past her new place once, a small rental on the east side of town, flower boxes in the window, her car parked neatly in the driveway. The lights were on. She was fine. Better, probably. He didn't stop. The town began to watch Ethan differently after that, not with fear, with caution, the same way he'd watched Caleb. He noticed it in small gestures, the way conversations paused when he entered a room, the way people checked the time suddenly, remembering something urgent they'd forgotten, the way mothers steered their children just slightly to the other side of the street. Not obvious, never obvious, but consistent. Ethan started recognizing the patterns he'd once created in others, the side glances, the hesitations, the unspoken agreement to just keep distance. He had taught them well. One evening, Ethan saw Caleb at the grocery store. Caleb was in the produce section, inspecting apples with the same unhurried attention he gave everything. Ethan stood 2 aisles over, pretending to compare soup cans he had no intention of buying. Caleb looked up. Their eyes met. Ethan waited for anger, for accusation. Caleb just nodded. Once, then went back to the apples. That nod hollowed Ethan out more than any confrontation ever could. The night stretched longer after that. He didn't patrol anymore, didn't listen for footsteps or check locks obsessively, but he couldn't sleep either. He'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling crack that still looked like a river, and replay everything in reverse. The knife he planted, the rumors he shaped, the doubts he seeded, the fear he fed until it grew teeth. Every decision felt justified at the time. Every step felt necessary. Now, arranged in sequence, they looked like something else entirely. A descent. Ethan's phone buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. He should talk to someone. No name. No follow-up. He deleted it, but the suggestion lingered. He started noticing things he'd ignored before. The way his hands trembled when he stood still too long. The way his heart raced at sounds that didn't exist. The way he checked the locks not twice, but 7 times. 8. Until the number felt right. The hypervigilance he'd called preparation had metastasized into something he couldn't control. He wasn't protecting anyone. He was performing rituals to keep panic at bay. And it wasn't working anymore. One night, Ethan dreamed he was back in that hallway, his sister's door ahead, the intruder already inside. But this time, when he reached for the handle, it was his own face staring back through the gap. He woke up gasping. The house was silent. Empty. Safe. But he didn't feel safe. He felt observed. He walked to the window and looked out at the street he'd spent years monitoring. The lampposts glowed softly. The sidewalk sat empty. Everything exactly as it should be. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Then he saw it. His own reflection in the glass. Staring back. He'd spent years listening for danger outside, measuring threats, calculating risks, building systems to ensure he'd never freeze again. And he'd succeeded. He hadn't frozen. He'd become something worse. Someone who acted without hesitation. Not out of courage, but out of fear that had learned to disguise itself as certain. The real intruder had never left. They had just changed faces. Caleb wasn't the danger. The shed wasn't the warning. The town wasn't under threat. Ethan was the pattern that didn't fit. He was the presence that made people lock their doors. He was the one who needed to be watched. The realization didn't arrive like a revelation. It arrived like an exhale he'd been holding for years. He sank down against the wall, knees pulled his chest, and understood with brutal clarity. He had spent years listening for danger, and never once asked who he become. Ethan Cross left Hollow Creek on a Thursday. No announcement, no goodbyes. Just a U-Haul half filled with things he couldn't justify keeping, but couldn't justify leaving behind either. The house sold quickly. Too quickly, maybe, but he didn't ask questions. Didn't negotiate. Just signed the papers and watched someone else's name replace his on documents that had once felt permanent. Celine didn't come to say goodbye. He didn't expect her to. Some distances are chosen. Others are necessary. He drove west because it felt like the opposite of staying still. New city, new apartment, new routines built carefully on top of old foundations that hadn't stopped cracking. He told himself distance would help, that geography could do what willpower couldn't. But trauma doesn't respect borders. It follows. The hypervigilance came with him. The counting, the checking, the need to know who lived in the unit above his, below his, across the hall. He learned their schedules without trying. Noted when lights turned on and off, when footsteps sounded wrong. He didn't patrol, but he listened, always listening. At night, he still woke at the same hour, his body remembering something his mind tried to forget. He'd stand at the window of his new apartment, looking out at streets he didn't know, searching for patterns in crowds that had no connection to him. Some habits don't break. They just find new places to live. Ethan started writing it down 6 months later. Not as therapy, not as confession, as warning. The story came slowly at first, fragmented, difficult, like pulling splinters from beneath skin. But once he started, he couldn't stop. The words felt necessary, urgent, not because he wanted forgiveness, but because he needed people to understand how it happens, how fear transforms, how good intentions curdle into control, how the line between protector and predator is thinner than anyone wants to believe. He published it as a podcast, anonymous at first, just a voice in the dark, telling a story that felt too specific to be ignored and too universal to be unique. Revenge Chronicles, he called it, because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a slow, methodical destruction of someone who never did anything wrong. And sometimes the person seeking revenge doesn't even realize they're the one holding the knife. The episodes went live late at night. Ethan's voice steady, controlled, walking listeners through every decision, every justification. Every moment he chose certainty over truth. He didn't hide what he'd done. He just explained it. The response surprised him. Not outrage, not condemnation. Recognition. People wrote in dozens and hundreds, sharing their own stories of vigilance turned toxic, of fear that outlasted the danger, of how easy it was to become the thing one was trying to stop. One message stayed with him. Asterisk. I thought I was protecting my daughter. Turns out I was teaching her to be afraid of everything, including me. Asterisk. He read that message 3 times. Then he archived it with the others he couldn't answer. He never mentioned Hollow Creek by name. Never said Caleb's. But he didn't need to. The story wasn't about them. It was about him. And people who needed to hear it recognized themselves in the telling. Months passed. The podcast grew. Not viral. Not famous. Just present. A quiet catalog of how harm happens when someone stops questioning their own certainty. He kept recording. Kept telling the story in different ways, from different angles, making sure the lesson landed where it needed to. But he never moved back. He couldn't, because healing wasn't geographical, and some consequences don't have expiration dates. Ethan saw Caleb once more, not in person. Just a photo someone shared in the community group he still followed from a distance. Caleb was at a volunteer event, smiling, handing out supplies at a food drive. Celine was beside him, not touching, not positioned like a couple, just beside him, both of them helping. Ethan stared at that photo longer than he should have, searching for something. Vindication, maybe, proof that he'd been right to worry. But all he saw were 2 people doing quiet good in a town that had learned slowly, painfully, to stop mistaking fear for wisdom. He closed the browser, didn't save the image. Some stories don't need endings. They just need distance. One night, months later, Ethan recorded the final episode, not because the story was finished, but because he'd said everything he could say. He sat in the dark, microphone close, and spoke the way he always did, steady, deliberate, like he was confessing to someone who already knew the truth. People asked me if I ever apologized, he said. If I ever went back, made amends, faced what I'd done directly. The answer is no, not because I don't regret it, but because some apologies are just another form of control. Another way of making the story about me instead of the harm I caused. Caleb doesn't owe me forgiveness. Celine doesn't owe me closure. Hollow Creek doesn't owe me rehabilitation. What I owe them is absence, and the promise that I'll spend the rest of my life understanding how I became the very thing I was hunting. He paused, let the silence hold weight. Then he spoke the final lines. Fear doesn't make someone careful. It makes them certain. And certainty, unchecked, unquestioned, will turn a person into someone unrecognizable. I know, because I spent years convinced I was protecting people. And I never once stopped to ask who was protecting them from me. This was Revenge Chronicles. And this was the night Ethan Cross finally met the devil he'd been hunting in the mirror. He sat in the silence. The red light blinked off. Somewhere, in a town he used to call home, the streetlights still hummed. Doors still locked. People still walked at night. But he wasn't there to watch them anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that made them safer. Ethan stood up, turned off the lamp, and walked away from the microphone without looking back. Because some stories don't end with resolution. They end with recognition. And the quiet, unrelenting work of living with what one has done. The fear never left him. It just learned his name. And he learned to stop pretending it was someone else's.